Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, Senior Marketing Specialist, to talk about mistakes that will stunt your agency's growth. My name is Sadie Palmer. I am the team leader of training and education, and I have the pleasure of hosting our expert here today, Shaylin Jackson.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chalon Jackson, the Key Account Specialist and Compliance Officer here at Senior Marketing Specialists. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about some of the mistakes is maybe a little harsh, but
Sure.
like
Yeah,
sometimes that's what people need to make change.
right. It's catchy. Y'all clicked on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, one thing I am excited about today is
Yeah,
lately you've been doing a lot of events, and a lot of it is from like this compliance officer standpoint,
sure.
seeing kind of overall industry things. And I'm really excited to have you on today to kind of hear from your key account specialist
Yeah,
perspective. You work with our top agents and our top agencies here at Senior Marketing Specialists, and you are one of 3 people on that team that are helping those people grow. And so I'm really excited to have you on today as our expert.
well, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really fun. We get to work with, agencies that are already performing at such a high level,
Hmm.
but it's always about what is that next step, and it's different for everybody.
Right.
So we have the ability to really help customize a growth plan for those agencies and work with them to reach the goals that they're trying to reach in a way that makes sense for the way they like to do business, the way they want to grow, and more importantly, a lot of these larger agencies may have agents under them that are trying to figure out their own growth plan.
Hmm.
So we're able to help adapt growth plans that we've seen work for other agents, other agencies, other places, and help them, tweak that a little bit and help grow their agency one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today, the points that we're going to be going over will be relevant for people who have had agencies for a long
Hmm.
time, and then also people who are getting started in the industry because um, a lot of things that are quote unquote stunting your agency's growth aren't necessarily like always the obvious things. They're not
Hmm.
necessarily always the things that you can see on paper.
Yeah,
And so today we're going to be going over those sorts of things. So let's jump right in, and we kind of start at the very beginning. And as you guys had phrased this before, kind of a failure to launch. What does that mean?
absolutely. Yeah. So I think, with all of these, you're going to see a common theme that the number one mistakes agents make is not even doing like the wrong things or not doing something. It's just not getting the timing right.
Hmm.
And with failure to launch, it's really simple. Starting a business is an incredible undertaking. And I
Hmm.
think that's maybe one of the big failures that a lot of folks see early on is not seeing this as a business from day one. Even if you're working under an agency, if you're working for someone else, like understanding that this is a business and being prepared to run it that way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And another thing is like not just underestimating like the time that it takes, kind of underestimating all of the effort, all of the money that goes into it,
Yeah.
all the different things. Not having the right expectations from the very beginning can really mess with how you view your agency is growing and how it can grow in the
Yeah.
future. One example, we were talking about this the other day in one of our like team group chats, which is like a good example on a smaller scale, is like, well, are these leads bad, or does this agent just have the wrong perspective of what
Sure.
these leads are supposed to do and how long it takes and the effort that goes into these leads? So on a bigger scale, it's kind of similar to that. It's not that you're not growing. It's not that you are maybe not doing everything right or whatever it may be. Maybe you just don't have the expectation of how long it's going to take and then how much effort you're going to have to put into it.
Yeah, well, and I think the reason that translates into failure to launch, why so many people fail in this industry before they ever get off the ground,
Hmm.
is not understanding that timeline adequately means that they're not financially prepared to make it that long.
Yeah.
It takes a year, 2 years sometimes to really start getting those renewals flowing, getting the revenue coming in at a level that can really support you. So if you don't have that nest egg to help support your living expenses, or a spouse that can help support you as you build something, or even just that marketing budget to help get going.
Hmm.
It can be really difficult to kind of weather the storm of starting the business
Yeah.
until it has enough revenue coming in to be self-sustaining.
Yeah. And even we have on here not knowing how to market to your community. What do you kind of mean by that?
I think one of the biggest things is going into this without a strong plan for marketing. So,
Hmm.
let's say you've done everything right. You've got 6 months of living expenses, you've got a marketing budget put together, and you start buying leads, and that's fantastic. But then all of a sudden, the lead money starts running out, and all you've got is a list of names that you can try to call for the 27th time, but you haven't spent any time building relationships in your community to
Hmm.
develop that local lead generation, or that kind of native lead generation.
Yeah.
And that's when I talk to new agents, I always use that 60/40/20/20 framework. 60% of your time needs to be spent on activities that are going to generate desired result this week.
Mm.
20% of your time on things that are going to generate a desired result within the next 30 days, and then 20% on some of those longer term projects. And a lot of that is where that community development, developing relationships with centers of influence or referral partners, that falls into that last 20%. And I think, especially for new agents, it is the most neglected bucket of time, because it's always, I've got to get the commissions coming in, especially if you've kind of failed at steps one and two of not understanding the time commitment, not having your finances aligned. Then it becomes really easy to fall into that kind of hand to mouth trap of needing to make that next sale and devoting no time to that long term development.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's kind of hard to see that from day one if you are
Mhm.
starting right out from beginning. But that is literally how you launch, is having those short-term goals and the long-term goals
Mhm.
as well. And
Absolutely.
we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. Before we move on to the next slide, I did forget to mention you can always text me this number that's right here. I have my phone with me, so if I'm looking at my phone, I'm talking to you guys and checking some things. So I'll answer those live. And then, of course, you can always put things in the live chat as well. And if you're watching this recording afterwards, you can always give our office a call or comment down below, and we're happy to reply to you guys. But moving on to the next slide, one thing that is great about
Yeah.
owning your own business is you are able to do anything however you want to do.
Which is also the worst
Which is
thing about
also the
owning your own
worst thing about
business.
owning your own business. If you're going to work for yourself, you don't have these systems and processes set in place. You have to set them yourselves. And
Absolutely.
sometimes people don't even realize that that's the issue, is that they don't have a system in place,
Mhm.
especially if they haven't hired anyone on or anything like that. And it's all just kind of in their own head. So first thing is how you spend your time. I mean, spending time is our most valuable, resource. So,
Yeah.
yeah, kind of talk about that a little bit.
Well, so I think I already mentioned, that 60/20/20 framework really is a great way to kind of get someone off the ground. But let's say you've started this business, you're a year or two in, you've got, some revenue coming in, you're growing your business, bringing on new clients, you're feeling pretty good about it, but you're getting stuck. You're capped out. You feel like you can't handle more people. Usually this happens to agents, by the time they hit their third annual enrollment period.
Mm-hmm.
You're just really feeling tapped out. Now, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're that busy in June, but it's really hard to get motivated to add a bunch of new clients if you know what AEP is going to look like.
Right.
So it starts that kind of burnout cycle. And we usually say, and we'll talk about this kind of on the next slide, is like, between 400 and 700 clients is where most people really need to start thinking about that hiring process, bringing someone on. But the difference between 400 and 700 is entirely systems and processes.
Yeah.
Depending on how you have set your business up, how you're tracking your data, how you're utilizing that data, that can be the difference between being really in need of a hire at 400 clients, or being able to make it to about 700, where it's going to be way more financially beneficial to hire someone on. It's going to be easier to bear that burden of payroll
Yeah.
at 700 clients rather than 400. So
Right.
first response is always going to be, look at where you can use systems, processes, technology
Mm-hmm.
to become more efficient in your business.
And also, I'm hearing it's like be willing to evaluate and change often as needed, because sometimes we get in this rut. Something is, we don't realize we're in a rut and we're like, oh gosh, I have a system and process in place, but is it working for you? Just grew 200 clients over the last year. So,
Yeah.
or, however many it may be. Yeah, so maybe it's time to change that up. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Like it's the classic, like what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And, I think like never, it's probably true of all industries, but like I think back to college to like my macroeconomics class and how like, man, if ever there was an industry that really dove into sunk cost fallacy,
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I just changed CRMs 2 years ago and it was so much work. I can't change again. It's only been 2 years.
Yeah.
Well, but if it's the wrong CRM for you, like, change.
Right.
Like doing the wrong thing for another year isn't going to make it more beneficial.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's just that sunk cost is really a big issue for a lot of agents. Like, I just did this, I just spent
Mm-hmm.
this money, I just spent this time. But that's just how it is. Like we've
Yeah.
got to make the change that's going to support growth, and sometimes that means changing systems, even if we just changed them 6 months ago or a year ago or even a month ago.
Right.
We all make bad purchasing decisions here and then. Sometimes that's, buying the wrong car. Sometimes it's a bad CRM or a bad hire or anything
Right.
like that. So really just looking at how you've organized your business, that ability to set up a repeatable system. And this is where, like I said, a lot of this is about timing. These things that will stunt your
Mm-hmm.
growth as an agency is about timing. You cannot begin to consider hiring someone until you've got a system you can plug them into.
Yes. Yeah. That's
And
huge.
and that's the biggest problem I see agents make is they want to do things in the wrong order. They want to hire someone and then train them to do things, but they don't have a system for that.
Yeah.
It's like if you can't write down on paper how you do something, how are you going to train someone to do it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah. And then also, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's also a level of like, well, if you want to keep people, if you want to keep employees, you have to
Yeah.
have a system in order to do that, because you have to keep in mind that whenever you hire on, they are not hiring on to you in their head. They're being hired to work for your agency. And before you hire someone on, sometimes it's hard to, like, you are the agency.
Yeah.
But whenever someone's coming into the process, it has to be, this is how the agency does it, not this is how I do it in my head. And you have to communicate that clearly. We'll talk about kind of hiring new people and stuff like that a little bit later. But for the systems and processes, there's lots of different things. It's not just how do we do today?
Yeah.
There's all these little micro ones. So with things like referrals and client experience and all those sorts of things, there's all these little things. Are these things that from day one you need to be thinking about how to set up a system? Or is this kind of a as you go on and as you grow, you're kind of adding these systems, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no. So I think it's like planting trees, right? There's the old adage, like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The second best time is today.
Yeah.
So like, yes, in a perfect world, like you get licensed, you start thinking about what is my client experience going to look like? What am I going to do for marketing? What am I going to do for compliance, client retention, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But like the right time to start is today.
Yeah.
Because just like everything else, like don't believe in that sunk cost. Like just because you haven't had a system up to now doesn't mean today's the wrong time to start.
Right.
So I think that's one of the biggest things is if you have a client system, a client experience process, like examine that, look at it. Is it what you want it to be? Is the client experience you've been providing what you want, a future downline to provide to somebody?
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing is like, is what you're doing now repeatable? Is it something
Yeah.
that you could train someone else to do? If someone else was doing it using your name, would you be happy with it?
Yeah. Yeah. Even just like specifically client experience, it's funny that it's like, well, not funny, I guess funny isn't the word, but it's one of those just like micro things in your business where it's like you probably have never really thought about what it looks like for someone to like step into your brick and mortar, or what it's like your first like presentation of like walking into their home, or like whatever it may be. We could do like a whole webinar on like each of these little things and setting up a system for it.
Yeah.
But I remember one time hearing that Dan Mangus He's a vice president here. He used to own an agency way back in the day, and one thing he would do is take the time to go and sit in his lobby for like 10 minutes and just see what are people seeing, what are people
Mhm.
doing while they're here, what are people hearing,
Yeah,
even getting down on that level of like, what is this like? Sometimes growth can come from changing those little tiny micro
absolutely.
things within your business, and that's just an example of it.
Well,
But
and it can help you, sorry, it can
no, no,
help
no.
you find places where not just where client experience can be improved, but it can also help you find missed opportunities.
Yeah.
It can help you
Yeah.
find,
Love
is
that.
the waiting room example is a great one. It's like, man, spend the 200 or 300 bucks to toss a TV up on the wall
Yeah.
and, run some content over that,
Hmm.
take one of your educational seminars and have the slide deck running, on a loop and, pair that with some product things or portfolio reminders, other
Hmm.
products you offer, things like that. So there's a lot that can be done. We've spent a lot of time over the years helping agents open their brick and mortar office. And one of the first things we always do is kind of walk through that client experience of, even really basic things like look at your doorknobs. Are they lever style or are they knobs?
Mm.
Because, especially if you're working predominantly with seniors, arthritis can make the knob style door handles an issue. So those lever style door
Interesting.
handles
Yeah.
can be more convenient for them. It's even, the legal side of it, looking at ADA and, Americans with
Hmm.
Disabilities Act, do you have accessible parking, accessible bathrooms, things like that in your office? Is it set up in a way that anyone can access your services?
Yeah.
So looking at that client experience from that side is a little protective also, just making sure that
Yeah.
your business is secure from that legal and compliance standpoint, but also making sure that anyone and everyone that walks through your door has a consistent experience.
Hmm.
Especially, we talk a lot about referrals, and I always tell folks the worst thing you can do to a referral is treat them worse than the person that referred you to them.
Yeah.
The second worst thing you can do is treat
Sure.
them way better than the person who
Mm.
referred them to you. It needs to be that consistent process because
Hmm.
you don't ever want Mary Jo to refer her, sister to you, and then it gets back to Mary Jo that, well, they weren't nice, they were rude, anything like that.
Right.
Mary Jo's never going to refer someone to you.
Yeah.
But if all of a sudden you've built this new client experience process and that referral gets a way better experience than Mary Jo,
Hmm.
Mary Jo's going to wonder, why am I not getting this?
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest mistake agents make is they'll set up that process for client experience and they'll just do it on a going forward basis. They won't go back and kind of bring all their current clients into the fold on whether it's we're going to start doing birthday cards for clients, we're going to
Hmm.
start doing, a newsletter or something like that. You've got to have that backward approach to make sure everyone is getting that consistent experience as soon as you set it up.
Yeah. Whenever you go into a lot of these things for most people won't necessarily come naturally. If you walk in, everyone has like that business that they walk into and they
Hmm.
say, I just love how it is from start to
Yeah.
finish. You have to keep in mind that that's not just on accident. Every single thing that you're experiencing is intentional.
Yeah.
So your business has to be intentional about every little thing, even if it's not obvious to them. That's the goal, is for them to just think this
Absolutely.
is just how it is. But everything, every little thing that someone experiences, there's intention behind it. Um, Another thing is being intentional about is tracking the correct data. Now, I also want to say, even a half step before that, make sure you are tracking data
Yeah.
because that's
Absolutely.
not something there are people like me who I might be good at the relational side and everything, and that's what makes me
Yeah.
good at my job. But I'm lacking in a lot of ways because I'm not a numbers person. I'm not a data's person. So I have to think. I would be someone who it's like, oh, yeah, I should probably track that.
Hmm.
So for you people out there that maybe aren't, maybe it could be for a bunch of different reasons. It could be because you don't want to use the technology, or you're like me and you're just like not numbers minded.
Yeah.
Just know it's crucial for you to grow is tracking your data, because how do you know it to change if you
Yep.
don't know what's happening? Yeah.
Absolutely. And this, I mean, everything from client acquisition cost, client lifetime value, your commissions and expenses. I would tell folks like it doesn't mean you need a staff person to do this out of the get go, but like hire a bookkeeping service, and like
Mm-hmm.
the first complaint is always like, that's going to cost a lot of money. I don't know if I have a lot of money. I feel like I'm always broke. Like my big thing is like, you're going to be broke either way, but if you hire a bookkeeper, you're going to know why. And
Right.
that's a
True.
big step in the right
It
direction.
is a
It
big step
really
in the right direction. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, One thing that we talk about a lot is CRMs and how
Mhm.
important it is for tracking data. CRMs are one of those things where it's like, oh, this is convenient. This is a convenience thing. This is something where I can just put all my notes, but it's so crucial
Yeah.
to have the right one and have it work for you. On Medicare Cafe, Ben and I were just talking about how important it is to find the right CRM for you. And like earlier, we were talking about how you have to be like willing to change. If maybe you have a CRM right now, maybe you're using an Excel sheet, that's okay. But you also have to be monitoring, is this working for me? Am I able to track the correct data that I want?
Yeah.
And then also on top of that, you have to know what data to track as well. So what are just some basic things before we move on?
Yeah.
What are some like basic things, a few basic things that someone who's just starting, make sure that you're tracking this?
Yeah. So obviously, for every client, you want all their demographic data. So anything that you would put on a fact finder or an intake form, you want to be able to store name, address, date of birth, Medicare number, add, any of that
Mm-hmm.
thing, those things, primary care doctor, drug lists, all of that demographic data. Anything you would need to requote them next year. But the bigger thing is, how did you find that client, or how did they find you? Was it a lead that you purchased? Was it a referral? Was it someone who saw
Mm.
your billboard or newspaper ad? Were they from an event? Because you've got to be able to track those expenses and how effective your marketing dollars are.
Yeah.
Did it come from a center of influence or a referral partner? You need to be able to track where those are coming from. You need to be able to track what products they have, what premiums they're paying, what commission you're earning on those products. That way, amongst all of those factors, you can start to calculate things like client lifetime value. How much over the life of this client am I going to earn for having that client in my book of business? And then how much did I spend to bring that client in house?
Yeah.
So looking at that acquisition cost, and especially starting out, there's a lot of agents that are running in the red on that and just don't
Mm-hmm.
even know.
Right.
And again, that's kind of that really early on hand to mouth feel that a lot of people run into. But making sure that you are making money on each client after those expenses, tracking things like how often someone changes plans, making sure you have good notes on any service work or service calls that you do for that client.
Mm.
If you have to call a carrier, if you have to call a provider or sit down with them, do some kind of three-way call, making sure you have good notes on that. So in the future, you can always call back to that if there's another issue, or if you're able to, dispute a claim with them, something like that. And then also, emergency contacts can be really important. That's something that I think a lot of agents
Mm.
really underestimate the importance of.
Mm-hmm.
Having that emergency contact for your client, because you would, if you're newer to this industry, you are drastically underestimating the number of times that you'll get a call eventually someday saying, mom's in the hospital, grandma's in the hospital. What do we need to do?
Mm-hmm.
And one, you need to know who those emergency contacts are. You need to know, do they actually have power of attorney, or are they just
Yes.
concerned?
Yeah.
And you, as an agent, really need to understand what you can and cannot share with those people.
Yeah.
That's another big part of it. But having that conversation ahead of time with your client, putting some paperwork in place, some consent in place to share information, can make that a little bit easier if there ever is a need to talk to that, sister, brother, spouse, child, grandchild, whoever it is that may help them with some of those decisions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here. One thing about this, it was hard to title this slide
Yeah.
because inefficient agency management sounds so broad, but it also
Yeah.
sounds so harsh because it makes it sound like you're not good at your job, or like you're not good at managing what it is. But again, sometimes people just don't even realize that there has to be this a certain level of management of certain things underneath it. That was a lot of words that
Yeah.
made no sense. But what I mean from that is like kind of going back earlier whenever I was saying, whenever you start to hire on whenever you start to hire people, you have to remember all of the different things that come with hiring someone onto an agency, not just to yourself. And sometimes you have it all in your head and you don't realize you need to sit down and kind of think of like the hiring process or anything like that. So first things first is one thing about managing your agency is realizing whenever you need help. And sometimes, like you said earlier, sometimes the default is to be like, oh, I'm in the middle of this. I needed someone yesterday, right?
Sure.
So first thing is just making sure that you're hiring before you need to.
Yep. Well, and man, it is really funny to me the number of times I've had this exact conversation with an agent where they'll tell me that they are too busy to hire someone. And it's like, well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Like if you're telling me you're too busy and you can't handle anymore, but you're also too busy to hire anyone,
Right.
that this is not going to go well.
Yeah.
So like understanding the priority of like if you're capped out, if you're hitting that phase where you just can't handle anymore as an individual producer, hopefully you have realized that is going to happen. Man, like the number of people not willing to bet on their own success in this industry is
Yeah.
outstanding, because you should understand, like if you've made it this far, if you've got 250 clients in your book of business, like all things being equal, you've got systems, you've got processes, you're going to grow to the point where you need help. Understand that now and understand the things you need to put in place to be able to hire someone. And I will say, like, almost every agent I talk to, not all, but almost everyone,
Mm-hmm.
their first hire was always too late and it was almost always the wrong hire.
Yeah.
Like, it just, people don't work out. I think that's the other thing is like people get really scared because they're like, what if someone doesn't work out? They're probably not going to. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to take a while to find someone who jives with the way you want to do business, the culture you're trying to build at an agency. And your first hire may be kind of, I hate to say sloppy, but like you've never hired anyone before. You never
Mhm.
interviewed anyone before.
Yeah.
You may not have a really good process.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing is just understanding what your first hire needs to be. And that depends a lot on how you see your business in the future. So every agent comes to a point where they've got that 400 to 700 clients. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they've got good systems in place, but like they are capped out. It's time to start looking at growth. And the big question is always, do I need a downline agent or do I need an admin?
Yes.
I personally am firmly in the camp that you always hire an admin first.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone agrees with me, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, in my opinion, if you're capped out and you hire an agent first to work under you, to work leads that you don't have time for, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
your production is going to suffer drastically. And,
Yes.
and in my opinion, not just on the short term. Like everyone will tell you, you hire someone, your production is going to suffer a little bit that first year because you're training, you're dealing with things, you're getting someone onboarded to that company culture, to those systems and processes. Like that is how it is.
Yeah.
But if your first hire is an agent, you have just become their admin,
Yes. That's exactly right. Yeah.
whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Until they know as much as you do, which took you however many years it took you to get to this point, you are their admin. So if you take the position that, hey, I someday want to be an agency owner where I manage the agency, I lead the agent team, I'm more of a sales leader than someone who's actually writing policies. If you can put a date on the calendar, by this date I want to have written my last policy ever and I just want to lead people and train agents at that point,
Mm-hmm.
then perfect. There is a world where hiring an agent first makes sense. But at the end of the day, if that's what you want to do, you're still going to need admin back office people to help out those agents. So
Yeah.
I am thoroughly camp admin for your first hire.
Yeah.
Take
Absolutely.
those things off your plate.
Yeah. Well, if you are looking to save time and energy and kind of focus on what you want to focus on, hiring, you have to make sure that whoever you're hiring aligns with how you want to spend your time.
Yep.
So like I'm just repeating what you said, but it's like admin, then if you hire an admin, then you're able to spend your time doing the thing that you want to do, which is selling. But if you hire on a downline, you're going to be spending a lot more time doing the managing
Yep.
and leading and things like that. Is that what you want to do? If that's what you want to do, that's great.
Yeah.
But you have to have the right expectations of the effort in the time that it will take for you for each of those individual hires. Another thing that we have on here is having a hiring process. And I think that this is important for the people who are newer on here because it's kind of your first impression of the
Absolutely.
people that are, that the process is the first impression of who you are as an agency manager and stuff like that. So Traylon, could you talk a little bit about like the importance of having an employee handbook? How do people come across?
Yeah.
How do they build these things? How do they build a hiring process?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to kind of three main areas. One is setting a good, clear set of expectations for any employee that you would want to bring on. What do I want out of that employee? And that comes down to starting with that job description of here are the actual day-to-day duties that you're going to have, but also all the way down the line to being able to adequately explain the culture you're trying to build as a company, explaining expectations, having HR policies, things like your time off policy, or how you're going to hire this person on. Is this a contractor or an employee, 1099 versus W2, things like that. And then understanding that you may be interviewing this person for a job, but they still have to want to work for you.
That's exactly right.
And you, especially as a small business owner, you very much are being interviewed as much as the person across the table from
Yeah,
you.
that's exactly right.
If you're asking someone to be your first hire, they're taking as much of a risk on you as you are on them.
Yeah.
Because we know the numbers on small businesses, the failure rate, the washout rate in the insurance industry. Your first hire is taking a big leap of faith by being your first hire, frankly. So understanding that and understanding that as an agent, that's really appealing because we were risk takers. When we got into this industry, we were betting on ourselves, willing to take that risk. So finding another person willing to make that bet and work with you can be a huge asset to your business. So knowing how to set up those guidelines, talk to your FMO, talk to an attorney, talk to someone that can help you set up the HR side, the legal side, all of that stuff, but really focus on company culture, on the exact duties that you want that person to do. And again, I'm talking more in the admin sense because I'm still camp admin thoroughly.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
like write down exactly what you want that person to do. And we can give you some ideas for that. I mean, things like if you have an admin, you should never be spending a minute on the phone with a carrier. Like your admin can handle that.
Yeah.
You should, not even at a point once you get them trained up and efficient and handling tasks well, like you should very seldom be in charge of your own calendar. They should be able to handle that for you. Like in a perfect world, those are the things that an admin can take on. Obviously, callbacks, checking on appointments, handling the phones, things like that make a lot of sense. But really developing that employee handbook to set those expectations well in advance. And, that's something that you ought to be providing to folks, if not at the interview, maybe even before the interview, so they know what kind of company they're going to be working for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's even like a whole conversation that we could have on like these younger generations that are coming up, the way that they look, the way that they look as employees, the way that they're incentivized.
Do you remember when we used to be the younger generation?
Oh, I like to think I still am.
Oh, okay. Sadie still is the younger generation.
But it you might have to change your perspective on your approach to all of those things.
Yep.
Especially we live in a college town.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a lot of part-time work here. There's a lot of like college kids, hey, while you're here for the summer, or
A lot of internships.
yes, lots of stuff like that. They're great people to hire, but you have to keep in mind that there might be a difference between hiring an admin that is someone who's fresh out of college or that age in college versus someone who has had plenty of work experience or is just from a different generation. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind that it's not bad. It's just different. And a big part of that is kind of knowing how to lead versus manage. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but there is a difference between leading and managing. And whenever you are hiring someone on, you have to keep in mind that you are in charge of both of those things.
Absolutely.
You're not just a manager, but you're also a leader. And
And I think you can entirely decide, and this is a really important decision, and a lot of people don't like to think this way at first, but you need to decide how long you want your employees to work for you before you start the hiring process. And what I mean by that is when you look at whether it's your pay, your benefit structure, the opportunities for advancement, how they can grow with your agency, you're going to decide one way or another, whether you do it intentionally or by accident, you're going to decide whether you find that person that's going to look for a new job in 3 or 4 years, which is, again, not necessarily a bad thing. Like,
Right.
if you have an employee for 3 to 4 years, that's actually better than average in the United States right now. But if you're saying, I want to hire this person once and I want them to retire when I retire,
Mhm.
that is a very different conversation. And it's a very different job description, culture, benefits package. The biggest thing I think for that is you have to have a really clear vision of what you want your business to look like in 20 years. Because if you're trying to hire someone who's going to be working with you 20 years from now, they need to know where they're going.
Mhm.
And if you don't know, they can't know.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's also a perfect transition into our next point here. Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, yeah. We've done this one or two times. Having an outdated growth plan is huge. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier is you have to be willing to constantly be looking at your systems and
Yeah.
processes and your goals and have you outgrown those? Is this something, even if it hasn't been that long, how much have you grown? And what are the things that you might need to change in order to hit that next level? So, the first thing, I love this point. Your plan must excuse me, your plan must accommodate the growth that you want. So
Mhm.
sometimes just having a plan of like, I want to grow this year,
Yeah.
that's not necessarily enough. How much do you want? What are the specifics of your goals? How much do you want to grow? And yeah, how do you want to get there?
Yeah. So I think, and just like to give folks some examples, because this was the first thing 2 or 3 years ago, we started getting really specific when we had annual goal meetings with the key accounts agencies. We would talk about growth, but it was always in this kind of arbitrary sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we started asking, what do you mean by that? So when you say you want to grow 20%, 20% of what? 20% of revenue, 20% of apps, 20% of policies, 20% of number of lives that you serve. You have to know what you're trying to grow.
Mm-hmm.
20% is a meaningless number unless it's 20% of what. So, and again, none of those are necessarily a bad goal, but you
Sure.
got to know what you're measuring so that you know, one, is that goal reasonable?
Mm-hmm.
Growth of, growing from, uh, you know, 500 clients to 550 clients is wonderful, 10% growth.
Mm-hmm.
But growing from, say, 500,000 to 550,000 in revenue may be a very different conversation. Again, very reasonable conversation to have, but you've got to know which one you're doing. Those are both 10% growth, but they have very different needs to get you there.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the biggest things. Have that plan in place, know what you're measuring. It has to be really specific. And again, it goes back to that, like, what got you here won't get you there.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially as we transition to, we're an agency now, we've got an employee, maybe we do have a couple downlines. That's where you've really got to have that conversation with yourself of what is your role in that agency long term.
Yeah.
Are you always going to be boots on the ground, selling policies, working with clients? Are you all wanting to transition to never selling another policy personally again? I think that's one of the single hardest conversations for agents to have with themselves,
Yeah.
because so many people get into this industry and, like, they don't know anything other than that sales process.
Right.
And to make the decision to step away from that to help grow other agents and help develop a team and things like that can be a really hard decision to make. And it's not a decision everyone should make.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of folks that struggle with it. I love my clients. I love working with my clients. That's why I do everything, is so I can help clients.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, the best possible future to help more clients is for you to stop writing business and train more people to do it the way you do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
For some folks, that's not the right way to grow. So really understanding what that looks like and what it looks like, not just in the next 12 months, but in the next 3 years, 5 years, 20 years of your agency, because it's going to be, again, different things through each of those stages. And a lot of times it's thinking about what does a day in my life look like when I reach this X goal.
Mm-hmm.
Really thinking about, like, I wake up, I hop into the office at what time, or on the phone or online, whatever your setup is. Like, what time am I rolling into work every day? Or is it every day? Is it 3 days a week? Is it 2 days a week? Those are all options too. But you really got to have a vision for what you want your day to day to look like, to start backtracking and figuring out the steps you're needing to get there.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. Sometimes whenever you make a goal, you kind of start out with this like, I want to do this goal. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to get there. And someone has to, at some point,
Yeah.
sit down and be the one that says, okay, this is how we're going to do it. How am I playing a role in this? How are my systems and processes going to make this more? What are my employees' goals? How do those fit together? What
Yep.
do we need to talk about? Yeah, for different levels of time, and then also knowing where you want your growth to come from. I think that this is really big. You kind of
Yeah.
talked about it, like how do you want to grow, where you want to grow, but there's a big difference. This industry is such a lead hungry industry, and I think whenever people unlock the like sort of not so secret of, hey, sometimes there's like you're sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah.
You don't have to base your whole business off of leads. You can actually be selling to the people who already have policies with you and save money while you're doing it. So you have to know which way, which direction, where you're going to take your growth plan. Sometimes that's leads, sometimes that's client retention, and then sometimes it's acquiring another book of business.
Yeah, absolutely. And acquisition can be a great way to grow. All of these things should factor into a growth plan,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like, no matter whether your goal is to continue writing policies or to step into that management role, that leadership role, um, all of these things can and should factor into it. At the end of the day, it's always going to be about, how can I maximize that revenue to feed whatever machine I'm trying to build?
Totally.
And taking a really hard look at that acquisition cost, lifetime value, retention, all of those factors, which, again, like, think 3 slides ago, that's why you have to set these up. Like, you may have noticed this kind of goes from, like, brand new in the industry to someone who's been around for a while. And that's on purpose, because these are steps that you can take throughout your career in this industry to make sure that you have success long term. And really looking at that, where you want that growth to come from, is important to do earlier than later. Because if you're sitting here going, I want to grow by acquiring books of business, well, let's look at what that takes. It takes, one, you're going to have revenue. You're going to have cash flow. You're going to have to be able to somehow finance this acquisition. So that means either being able to show revenue to get a loan from a bank, being able to have enough revenue to be able to self-fund that, working out a deal with the person you're buying from to potentially fund that through, some kind of purchase agreement, delayed compensation. You're going to make sure, hey, I've got to have the team in place to transfer all this data
Mm-hmm.
from this book of business that I've purchased, data that probably isn't in a format that your data is in, data that may not be in a format that's machine readable,
Mm-hmm.
data that may not exist.
Yeah, yeah.
But take all this data that we want and put it into our system from that other agent's system.
Mm-hmm.
And then also looking at, okay, let's say we buy a book of business of 500 clients. Realistically, like, to run it effectively, to run it efficiently, you kind of need a person for each 500 clients your agency services. And again, with really good systems and processes, you can bump that number up 600, 700, but realistically, every 500 clients deserves a person in your agency, whether that's an admin, an agent, somebody that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck from, like, a client services standpoint,
Yeah.
a retention standpoint, client experience, but also maintaining that revenue generating profitability that you're looking for.
Right. Yeah. And having all of those other systems and processes in place that we've kind of talked about having all of those set up beforehand makes a huge difference, because if you don't have a good process or you don't have a good look on what your client experience is, you can spend all this money to acquire a book and then they switch to a new person and they go, this is not the same that it was
Mhm.
with the last person. And so then you've just lost a bunch of, um, clients. And then it's like, oh, turns out like that wasn't as good of a,
Sure.
so having everything set up before then. But yes, moving on to our last slide here. What number is it? There we go. Number 6, not having an exit plan. Now, this is one of those things that we've been talking a lot about here in office internally at Senior Marketing Specialists. It's been a hot topic, but a lot of people, especially whenever you're first starting out, you just are not thinking about, well, how am I going to get out of this business? How do I
Yeah.
transition out of this business? And even people who have been in it for a long time, sometimes they have an idea, like my son will take over or whatever it may be, but they don't have an actual plan set in place. And then whenever it comes time, they're like, oh, whatever I was planning on just mentally
Mhm.
isn't playing out the way that it is. So, yeah, kind of talk about what it means to have
Yeah.
an exit plan.
Well, and I think this is a symptom of like just in general not doing a ton of long-term planning. Like we just got done talking about like you need that growth plan, and I think it's a symptom of like, man, agents, like when you're in any kind of sales role, but like speaking from someone who was an agent back in the day, like, man, even some of the best agents I know, some of the people who have built huge businesses that have, many downlines, several admin staff, they like, I don't know a single agent that doesn't feel like they're thousands of apps away from success, but never more than one app away from failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it goes. So I
Right.
think, this is just a symptom of that, like understanding that things take time, understanding that we need to plan ahead. It's difficult. And like the conversation I've started having with agents is like, whether you like it or not, you will exit this business someday.
Right. Whether you
It,
plan on it or not. Like sometimes we work in with a senior demographic. I'm like
Mhm.
trying to figure out how to say this without sounding too morbid. We work with a senior demographic, so a lot of people who are selling this product are also in that senior demographic, and it is we have a whole division here called acquisition pathways
Yeah.
that works with this, and we have seen cases where the agency owner passes away.
Mhm.
They were not planning on exiting the business that day or
But you
that week or
will,
that
one
month,
way or
but you
another.
will. And then sometimes it's like, cool, they had everything planned out. We're good to go in this kind of surprise. And then a lot of times it's like, oh, that was something that they were probably like, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that tomorrow. And now it's kind of a mess and a bit chaotic
Yeah.
figuring out what is happening to this business and all the
Mhm.
people that work for this business.
Yep. And I'm happy to be a little more morbid than Sadie. If your plan is to die at your desk, like more power to you. Like if that's how you want to go out, great. But there's a lot of things that happen after that.
Right.
And that's what you need to be worried about. So, we've got a couple things on the slides there of like having a plan for your successor, legal documentation, setting up your agency correctly. Like a lot of those are great questions for your attorney, great questions for your accountant, making sure that the legal side of your business is clean to ensure a smooth transition, whether that is a sale, whether that is upon death, whatever it is. Making sure that data is easy to see and track if you do plan on selling someday, making sure that you can get an accurate and fair valuation for your company. But at the end of the day, this is about what do you want to happen to that agency when you're gone. And again, sometimes it is maybe not what you originally planned on. Maybe you don't have that spouse or that child or key employee that can take it over. And again, this is all about long term planning. If you, let's say you've got that, you did a really good job listening 3 slides ago and you set up that plan and that vision and that hiring process and that admin that you hired 20 years ago that has been with you forever, that's your plan. They're going to take over for you. Does that admin have the capability to buy your agency from your spouse or your
Mm-hmm.
survivors or your estate? Like, do they have the finances to support that? Have you been putting a system in place where they can save up that money over time. They can finance that in some way. You maybe have a key man life insurance policy in place to help finance that sale.
Mm-hmm.
If not, you're putting them in a really bad position. You're putting that successor in a position where are they going to have to go into a massive amount of debt just to make your family whole, just so they can take over an agency and then struggle to keep it going.
Yeah.
That can cause, a lot of issues for your clients. Because at the end of the day, again, we all just want our clients taken care of. And I think that's something that a lot of agency owners don't think about in this kind of succession planning or exit plan is what happens to the clients after we're gone. And again, if you want to die at your desk, that's great. If you want to ride off into the sunset and sit on the beach with your family and hang out, that is also great. That's probably the route I'll take someday.
Me too.
I hope.
Heck
But at the end of the day, like, you have to be able to facilitate that, and you have to make sure those clients are going to be taken care of. Because if you haven't done all of the previous steps to set up a resilient agency that can maintain those client relationships long term, you're not going to get the valuation that you deserve. You're not going to get that purchase price that you want. It's going to make it harder to step away from that business. And like I've said several times, like, if you want to die at your desk, that's great. If you want to sit on the beach, that's great. But I don't want you to have to do either one of those things because your agency's not set up properly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really great point. Guys, let's go ahead and transition to questions now. We've covered a lot of ground here. There are a lot of different points that just single bullet points in this presentation where it's like, we can literally do a whole webinar. We can do a whole training over just that one thing. So if you have any questions, we'll be here for just a few more minutes. You guys have been quiet today. So text me or throw in the live chat if you have any questions. We're happy to answer them. And then also, let me just go ahead and pop. Nope, not that one. Pop the last slide on here. If you want to follow up with us, please feel free to give our office a call. We have a live chat feature as well on our website, so check that out. This recording here today will be, because we're going live on our YouTube channel, just post right under our live, so feel free to check those out. We have whole teams that will help you with the things that we've talked about here today, so know that you are not in this alone. You might own your own business for the first time, or it's not for the first time and you've had this for a long time and, you're only human. This is your first time living too, and so you don't know what to do. Our team is equipped to help everybody from just printed off your license to been in the industry for decades. So, please feel free to chat with us about that. But Chaylin, do you have anything to add before we get out of here?
Super curious. If you're not watching this live, this is going to be really lame. But if you are watching this live, anyone going to be in Vegas for Medicarians next week?
Whoop whoop! I wish I was.
I'm going to be there. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
If you want to come see me, find me on the app. There's a great Medicarians app. We can catch up. Would love to chat with some folks if you're going to be out there. Should be a great event. I'm speaking on a panel about the 2026 final rule that should drop sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
All
I
right.
don't know if it'll be out by the time we have the panel or not.
Yeah.
But going to be a lot of content out there.
Yeah. Also, if you tune in, or if you don't tune in to Medicare Cafe, Chaylin and Olivia will be going live on the Medicare Cafe from Medicarian, so you won't want to miss that. Tuesdays at 10 a.m. That's just another senior marketing specialist podcast that we have, a web show that we have every week. So that's exciting. I'm excited for that to hear.
I think it'll be
what's
good.
going on.
We're gonna try to find some nice local coffee joint to do that from, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we got Olivia to agree to that before she realized that was going to be 8 a.m. Pacific time. But we'll be there. We will be there.
It'll be awesome. Cool, guys. Well, since there's no questions or anything like that, please feel free to give us a call, live chat us, whatever you want. We would love to connect with you on these things. But thank you so much for joining us. Chaylin, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down with me, talk about this today. But yes, thank you guys so much. See you next time.